The moment the vacuum cleaner turned on, everything went wrong. I don't mean wrong like spilling coffee on your shirt or forgetting your keys. I mean the kind of wrong that makes you question every life decision that led you to this exact moment, standing barefoot in your apartment while a dragon prepares to commit domestic terrorism against a household appliance. It started with a hum. A soft, harmless electrical buzz from the corner of my living room. The kind of sound you ignore because it means cleanliness is about to happen. Normal life. Ordinary chores. Stability. Then Ignis woke up. I saw it in his eyes first. That slow shift from calm amber to something sharper. Focused. Predatory. Like a switch had been flipped inside his skull that said, "Threat detected." He lifted his head from the rug. The air changed. I swear the temperature dropped. Ignis. I said carefully, already moving toward the wall switch. It's just the vacuum. Relax. Too late. The vacuum cleaner's motor kicked into full power. WHR. That was the breaking point. Ignis exploded. Not metaphorically. Not emotionally. I mean physically exploded off the floor like a cannon shot made of scales and rage. The rug beneath him tore slightly as he launched forward, wings snapping open just enough to stabilize his trajectory. No, wait, Ignis, stop. But I was already a second behind reality. The dragon hit the vacuum cleaner like a guided missile. The collision wasn't graceful. It wasn't elegant. It was catastrophic. Plastic cracked. The hose whipped wildly like a dying serpent. The machine toppled onto its side, still screaming its mechanical whir, sucking in air uselessly as if trying to understand why it was suddenly under attack by a 4-foot apex predator. Ignis pinned it instantly. Claws dug into the casing. His wings flared wide, blocking the light from the window. His entire body trembled, not from fear, but from intensity, from conviction. The vacuum cleaner thrashed beneath him, still alive, still trying to function, still making that awful high-pitched sound that only made things worse. And then Ignis roared. It wasn't a cute dragon noise. It was ancient, deep, like something carved out of volcanic stone in anger. The sound chipped the glass in my windows. My coffee mug slid off the table and shattered on the floor. Somewhere in the hallway, a neighbor shouted, "What the hell is that?" I stood there frozen, barefoot, staring at the scene unfolding in my living room like I had accidentally summoned a boss fight in real life. "Ignis!" I shouted again, louder this time. "It's not alive." That only made it worse. The dragon snapped his head toward me for half a second, just enough to acknowledge I was speaking nonsense, and then redirected all his fury back to the vacuum cleaner. It tried to roll away. It failed. Ignis struck it again with his tail. Another crack. Another protest of plastic and electricity. I took a step forward, then stopped, because I realized something very important in that moment. I was losing control of my own apartment. To a dragon. Over a vacuum cleaner. And the worst part, this wasn't the first time. Last week it was the toaster. Before that, the microwave. The blender didn't even survive long enough to be classified as an appliance anymore. It was now just that thing I used to own. Every modern device I brought into this home was treated the same way by Ignis. Immediate hostility, followed by swift and decisive destruction. But this was different. The vacuum cleaner wasn't just being attacked. It was being hunted. Ignis adjusted his stance, lowering his body like he was preparing for a final strike. His eyes never left the machine. The vacuum let out one last pathetic whine, and something in Ignis clicked. Not rage. Recognition. Like he believed, with absolute certainty, that he was facing something that should not exist. Something that needed to be erased. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Okay," I muttered to myself, backing away slowly. "This is officially above my pay grade." The vacuum cleaner sparked. Ignis inhaled. A small ember flickered at the edge of his mouth. I froze again. "Don't you dare," I whispered. Too late. The fire began to build, and I realized, standing in the middle of my ruined living room, that I had made a catastrophic mistake when I decided to adopt a dragon and call it manageable. Because apparently, somewhere between feeding schedules and naps, I had somehow acquired a creature that believed my cleaning equipment was part of an ancient war, and he had every intention of winning it. The vacuum cleaner screamed one more time, and Ignis answered with fire. "My name is Evan Carter, and I want it officially recorded, somewhere, anywhere, that I did not apply for a life involving repeated combat with household appliances. When I adopted Ignis, The brochure said things like high intelligence, strong bonding instincts, and suitable for urban environments with proper training. What it did not say was, "We'll declare war on anything with a motor." The aftermath of the vacuum incident looked like a small disaster zone. My living room couch was missing half its cushions. One of them had somehow ended up on top of the bookshelf. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. The coffee table was on its side, one leg slightly cracked, like it had tried to escape and failed. And the vacuum cleaner, my poor, innocent, completely unprepared vacuum cleaner, was now sitting in the corner like a defeated soldier that had seen things it could never unsee. It still technically worked, which felt like a threat. Ignis sat proudly in the middle of the room, tail curled neatly around his paws, eyes half-lidded in satisfaction. Tiny wisps of smoke still drifted from his nostrils like punctuation marks on a very final statement. "You can't keep doing this," I said, rubbing my temples. Ignis blinked slowly. "I can," he said simply. That was part of the problem. He always said things like that. Calm. Certain. Like he had already run the simulation and accepted all outcomes. I walked carefully around the room, stepping over debris. It's a vacuum cleaner. It doesn't have a soul. It doesn't even have thoughts. Ignis tilted his head slightly. That is what it wants you to believe. I stopped. What? He stood up. The motion was slow, deliberate, like a king addressing a peasant, or a dragon preparing a lecture nobody asked for. "It consumes," he said. "It cleans." I corrected automatically. He ignored me. "It devours dust. It pulls it into darkness and never releases it. That is not cleaning. That is imprisonment." I stared at him. "You're telling me you think the vacuum cleaner is evil because it picks up date?" Ignis narrowed his eyes. "It steals what it cannot understand." I took a long breath. This was not going well. I had dealt with fantasy creatures before in theory. I read the manuals, watched the training videos. There were sections on aggression triggers, territorial bonding, fire suppression techniques. None of them included what to do if your dragon develops a moral vendetta against cleaning appliances. Still, I tried again. "Okay," I said slowly. "What about the toaster?" "The toaster didn't even do anything to you." Ignis didn't hesitate. "It betrayed me first." I blinked. "The toaster. It lured bread into false safety," he said, dead serious. "Then trapped it. Burned it. Repeatedly. That's literally its job." "Then its job is cruelty." I pressed my fingers against my forehead. Somewhere deep inside my brain, a survival instinct whispered that I should have moved out of this apartment weeks ago. Instead, I had insisted on making it work. That was my mistake. I turned toward the kitchen. The blender sat there quietly on the counter like it was trying to pretend it wasn't involved in anything. I pointed at it. "And the blender? What did the blender ever do to you?" Ignis turned his head. His eyes locked onto it instantly. "Oh no. No," I said quickly. "Don't even think about it. It fragments matter," he said. "It makes smoothies. It destroys form. It mixes fruit." Violently. I sighed. This is insane. Ignis took one step forward. The blender, as if sensing judgment for the first time in its existence, made a faint rattling sound when I nervously bumped the counter. That was all it took. Ignis tensed. I reacted instantly. "Nope, absolutely not. Back away from the blender, Ignis, I swear." But he was already moving. Not fast this time. Wise, deliberate, calculated. Like he had decided the blender required formal judgment, rather than impulsive destruction. I physically blocked the kitchen entrance. "Listen to me," I said firmly. "You cannot keep attacking everything that spins, hums, or plugs into a wall." Ignis stared at me. Then he said, very calmly, "Then your world is hostile." That sentence hit harder than it should have, because for a second, I realized something uncomfortable. From his perspective, everything in my apartment was loud, mechanical, constantly moving, constantly consuming energy, breaking things down, transforming them. To him, it probably looked like a machine ecosystem of predators, and he was just reacting, protecting. Misguided, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But not random. He wasn't insane. He was interpreting. Badly. Very badly. But still. The vacuum cleaner suddenly flickered from the living room. Still on. Still alive. Still making that soft mechanical hum like it had learned nothing from near death. Ignis immediately turned his head. I groaned. Don't you even think about it. His wings lifted slightly. I stepped sideways. He stepped forward. And I realized, with growing dread, that I had created a situation where my dragon was now actively patrolling my home for appliances. Not relaxing. Not sleeping. Hunting. Ignis, I said slowly, we need rules. He didn't respond. So I added, very strict rules. The vacuum cleaner hummed again. Ignis growled softly. And I knew, absolutely knew, that unless I solved this fast, I was going to lose every appliance in my apartment one by one, until there was nothing left but me, a dragon, and a very dusty floor. By the third day, I stopped pretending this was a simple behavioral issue. This wasn't training anymore. It was ideology. Ignis had developed what I can only describe as a belief system, one centered entirely around the idea that anything with spinning parts was either dangerous, malicious, or actively plotting against him. And the vacuum cleaner had become its symbol. I learned this the hard way. I decided to run tests. Controlled conditions. Neutral environment. No surprises. I even wrote it down like a responsible adult, because at this point I was either documenting a scientific breakthrough or my own descent into madness. Hypothesis 1. Ignis reacts to sound. I brought the vacuum cleaner into the room. Unplugged. Off. Silent. Ignis was asleep near the window. I nudged the vacuum slightly into view. Nothing. He didn't move. I waited. Still nothing. I exhaled. Okay, I whispered. It's just sound. That's manageable. Then I pressed the power button. A faint hum filled the room. Not even full power. Just a soft electrical rise. Ignis's eyes snapped open instantly. That alone was disturbing. No gradual waking. No confusion. Just immediate awareness, like his brain had been waiting for that exact frequency. He looked at the vacuum cleaner. Then he hissed. Not a warning hiss. A recognition hiss. Like he had seen an old enemy return from exile. So much for Hypothesis 1. I moved on. Hypothesis 2. Physical interaction triggers aggression. I unplugged it again. Showed it to him while it was off. Let him sniff it. He circled it slowly. I thought, briefly, that we were making progress. Then he backed away. Slowly. Deliberately. And said, very quietly, "It remembers me." I blinked. What? But he didn't elaborate. Just stared at it like it had spoken first. That was when I realized something unsettling. He wasn't just reacting to stimuli. He was assigning intent, which is not ideal in any species that breathes fire. I decided to escalate carefully. Hypothesis 3. Exposure reduces hostility. I placed the vacuum cleaner in the center of the room. Plugged in. On standby. No movement. No suction. Just presence. Ignis sat across from it. Watching. I sat between them like a referee in a match nobody agreed to. Minutes passed. Nothing. Then the vacuum emitted a soft electronic click. That was it. Ignis stood up instantly. Slow. Controlled. Predatory. I raised a hand. Okay, just a noise. That's all. He ignored me. He started circling. The vacuum remained still, probably regretting its entire existence at this point. Ignis, I said firmly. It's not doing anything. It is waiting, he said. For what? For weakness. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because that was absurd. Right. Except Ignis wasn't joking. And that's when I understood the real problem. This wasn't fae. It wasn't even instinct. It was interpretation layered over instinct until reality itself became negotiable. The vacuum cleaner hummed again, barely audible. Ignis flinched. Then growled. Then said something that changed everything. It is not one of them. I frowned. One of what? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the vacuum. His claws clicked softly against the floor. I have seen their kind before, he said. My stomach tightened slightly. What kind? The devourers, he said. That word landed heavier than it should have. Devourers. They take, Ignis said. They consume. They bind what is loose and never release it. That's literally what cleaning is, I said, exasperated. But he didn't look at me. He looked through me. Like I wasn't part of the conversation anymore. Like I was background noise to a memory I didn't have access to. I burned one once, he said. I froze. You what? Silence stretched. The vacuum hummed softly, completely unaware that it was now part of an ancient narrative of interspecies warfare. Ignis, I said slowly, you've never left this apartment. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then tilted his head. Not in this form. Oh, that was not good. Not good at all. I sat down slowly on the couch, which creaked ominously like it was also tired of this conversation. So let me get this straight, I said carefully. You think vacuum cleaners are part of some ancient enemy race you fought before? Ignis didn't hesitate. Yes. And the toaster? Yes. The blender? Yes. The microwave? He paused, then added, that one is a lesser gate. I buried my face in my hands. There was a long silence. The vacuum cleaner gave a small mechanical whir, like it was trying to contribute to the discussion but lacked the vocabulary. Ignis immediately snapped his head toward it again. I lifted one finger without looking up. No. Another pause. I finally looked at him. Ignis, I said, trying very hard to stay calm. None of these things are alive. They're machines. He stared back. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this would land. Then he said, so are they gods? And that was when I realized I was no longer dealing with a pet. I was dealing with a belief system. One where every appliance in my home had been promoted, in my dragon's mind, into a soldier of an invisible war. And I had absolutely no idea how to convince a creature that breathes fire that his entire understanding of reality was fundamentally wrong. Especially when he looked at the vacuum cleaner, like it had personally started the war. The first sign that things were getting out of hand wasn't the fire. It was the paperwork. Or more accurately, the absence of paperwork, because the moment authorities get involved in a situation that includes a dragon, a vacuum cleaner, and unexplained structural damage, nobody seems eager to leave a written record. But I'll get to that. It was a Tuesday when everything escalated beyond my ability to classify it as domestic inconvenience. I remember the day clearly because I had just convinced myself, foolishly, that Ignis had finally calmed down. He was curled near the window, tail wrapped around himself, eyes half-lidded. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, even. The vacuum cleaner was in the hallway closet, unplugged, hidden, safe. I had learned that lesson the hard way. I was making tea when I heard it. A faint hum. So soft I almost convinced myself it was my imagination. Almost. Then the closet door vibrated. Just slightly. A single, subtle tremor. Ignis's eyes snapped open. I froze mid-step. No, I whispered. The hum increased. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just present. Like something had awakened and was remembering what it was. Ignis rose. Slowly. Deliberately. And I felt that sinking sensation in my stomach again, the one that meant I was about to lose control of my environment. Don't, I said firmly, stepping into his path. It's not doing anything. He didn't look at me. That was worse than if he had. Ignis, I said again, louder. It's a machine. It doesn't think. It doesn't plan. It just... The closet door clicked. The vacuum cleaner had shifted slightly inside. That was it. That tiny mechanical adjustment. And Ignis lunged. The sound that followed was immediate chaos. The closet door didn't just open. It ceased to exist as a functional boundary. Splinters of wood scattered across the hallway. The vacuum cleaner tumbled out like a reluctant participant in a prophecy. And then Ignis was on it. Again. Claws. Weight. Impact. The hallway filled with the sound of plastic cracking and electrical protest. Ignis! I shouted, but my voice barely mattered. He was already roaring. Not just anger this time. Certainty. Absolute certainty. Like he was correcting a mistake the universe had made. I grabbed a broom. Completely useless. I knew that. But instinct is not rational. And ran in. The vacuum cleaner was still on. Somehow. Still trying to function under a dragon. Still alive in the most technical sense imaginable. Ignis, stop. I yelled. It's not attacking you. He snapped his head toward me for a fraction of a second. And in that moment, I saw it. Not rage. Not confusion. Recognition. Like I was the one who didn't understand the rules of the world. Then he exhaled. A short burst. Not full fire. Controlled. Precise. The vacuum cleaner shuddered violently. And then, finally, went silent. The hum stopped. The lights flickered out. And for a moment, there was nothing but smoke curling upward from scorched plastic. The silence that followed was heavy. Too heavy. I stood there in the hallway, breathing hard, broom still in hand like some kind of tragic joke. Ignis slowly stepped back from the remains. His wings folded, his breathing steadied, and then he did something that unsettled me more than the attack itself. He looked satisfied, not triumphant, not excited, satisfied, like a soldier returning from duty. That's when the knock came. 3 sharp hits on the apartment door. I froze. Ignis's head turned instantly. His pupils narrowed. "No," I whispered again, exhausted. "No, no, no." I opened the door. A man stood there in a uniform I didn't recognize at first. Not police. Not building security. Something in between. He looked past me immediately. Into the hallway. At the shattered closet door. At the scorch marks. At the remains of the vacuum cleaner. Then he slowly looked up. "Sir," he said carefully, "is that a dragon?" I opened my mouth, closed it, then said the only thing my brain could produce. "It's complicated." Behind me, Ignis let out a low, warning sound. The officer took one step back. "I'm going to assume," he said slowly, "that whatever is happening in there is above my pay grade." "That's a fair assumption," I said quickly. He nodded once, then pointed at the hallway again. "Was that your vacuum cleaner?" I looked at the wreckage. "Yes." He nodded again, slowly, like he was filing it away in a mental drawer labeled "Do Not Open." Then, very quietly, he said, "Say, I recommend you do not call emergency services again." I didn't call. He was already backing away. "Have a good evening." The door closed. Just like that. No questions. No follow-up. Just immediate emotional retreat from the situation. I stood there for a long moment, then turned slowly toward Ignis. He was sitting again. Calm. Composed. Like nothing had happened. Like the hallway wasn't filled with the aftermath of a war against a household appliance. "Ignis," I said tiredly, "we are going to have a very serious conversation about boundaries." He blinked at me, then said, very softly, "It was not the only one." And that was when I realized something horrifying. He wasn't done. Not even close. Because in his mind, this wasn't an incident. It was a campaign. That night, I didn't sleep. Not properly, anyway. Sleep is difficult when you're sharing a small apartment with a dragon who believes your home appliances are part of an ancient, ongoing war. The hallway still smelled faintly of burned plastic and ozone. The vacuum cleaner, what remained of it, had been respectfully relocated to the balcony, which felt like the least I could do for something that had been declared both enemy and casualty in the same afternoon. Ignis was quiet. Too quiet. He sat near the window again, tail wrapped neatly around his body, watching the city lights like they were distant stars he didn't quite trust. I sat on the floor a few feet away. No couch. That had become a debris zone. No chair either. I'd stopped trusting furniture that could be emotionally damaged. "So," I said finally, breaking the silence, "we need to talk." Ignis didn't look at me. That was becoming a pattern. "Ignis," I continued, "what happened today cannot happen again." A pause. Then, softly, "It will." I exhaled slowly. "Why?" He turned his head slightly, not fully toward me, just enough to acknowledge I existed. "Because they are still hay." I rubbed my face. "The vacuum cleaner is dead." A beat. Then, "One of them is." That sentence made my stomach tighten again. I leaned forward slightly. "Ignis, there's no them. There's just household appliances. Machines. Tools." He finally looked at me directly, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't fully noticed before. Not confusion. Not delusion. Conviction laid over memory. Like he was trying to translate something vast into something small enough for this room. "You do not remember," he said. I hesitated. "Remember what?" He stared past me again, through the wall, through the apartment, like he was seeing something else entirely. "I was not always small," he said. That hit differently than his usual statements. Usually, his ancient knowledge sounded like misinterpretation. This sounded certain. I let out a slow breath. "Okay, let's assume for a moment I believe you. Which I don't, but let's assume it. What does that have to do with a vacuum cleaner?" He stood. Slowly. The air in the room felt heavier when he did. I have seen their kind before, he said again. Not this shape. Not this form. But the same hunger. I frowned. Vacuum cleaners don't have hunger. They consume, he replied immediately. That's not hunger. It is function pretending to be innocence. I stared at him. There it was again. That framework he kept returning to. Consumption. Imprisonment. Devouring. Everything mechanical was being interpreted as intent. I tried a different angle. Okay, I said carefully. Let's talk about what you think they are. Ignis didn't hesitate. Devourers, he said again. And what do they devour? He looked at the balcony. At the remains of the vacuum cleaner. At what is loose. I waited. He continued, quieter now. Dust. Ash. Remnants. Things that should not be bound. I blinked. Ignis, that's literally what dust is. It's garbage. Skin cells. Date. He tilted his head slightly. And yet it moves. I stopped. What? When it is disturbed, he said, it moves. It spreads. It becomes there again. I stared at him for a long moment, then slowly realized what was happening. This wasn't just fae. It wasn't even paranoia. It was a completely alien interpretation of basic physics. To him, dust wasn't debris. It was a dispersed entity. And vacuum cleaners didn't clean it. They captured it. Ignis, I said slowly, do you think dust is alive? He considered that. Seriously. Like it was a difficult question. Then, it is unbound. That was his answer. Not yes. Not no. Unbound. I leaned back against the wall. This was worse than I thought. Because now I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding. I was dealing with an entirely different model of reality. I tried again. Okay. Even if, again, hypothetically, dust is something you think is alive, why would vacuum cleaners be the enemy? Ignis went silent for a long moment, then spoke very quietly. Because they do not release it. I frowned. Release it way. Back. Back way. He looked at me directly again. And this time, his voice dropped lower, to where it came from. The room felt colder. I stared at him. That doesn't make any sense, I said. It does, he replied. And for the first time, I noticed something in his tone. Not aggression. Not anger. Something older. Grief. That unsettled me more than the fire ever had. I stood up slowly. All right, I said carefully. New rule. He watched me. We are not destroying any more appliances. A pause. Then, they will retain. No, I said firmly. They will not. Because I will not bring any more into this apartment until we figure out how to coexist. Ignis didn't respond immediately. Then he said something that made my entire argument collapse. You cannot stop them from arriving. I frowned. Yes, I can. I control what I buy. He blinked slowly. You think you brought them here? That question landed wrong. Too precise. Too intentional. What do you mean? I asked cautiously. Ignis turned back toward the window. The city lights flickered faintly through the glass. They follow, he said. Who follows? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, the same pattern always repeats. Silence stretched between us again. I felt something uncomfortable building in my thoughts. Because despite how absurd all of this was, the talking dragon, the enemy vacuum cleaner, the metaphysical dust theory, there was one thing I couldn't ignore. Every appliance I had brought into this apartment had ended up destroyed. Not randomly. Not scattered. Systematically. I swallowed. Ignis, I said quietly. What happens if there are no more appliances? He finally looked at me again. And for the first time, his expression softened. Not relieved. Not satisfied. Uncertain. Then he said, then we will know what is underneath them. And I suddenly understood the real problem wasn't my dragon's hatred of vacuum cleaners. It was the fact that, in his mind, I hadn't been living in a normal apartment at all. I had been living on top of something he believed was still moving underneath. Waiting. And the vacuum cleaner wasn't the enemy. It was just the first thing that noticed it was there.